The courtroom smelled of polished wood and old paper, but to Maya Ellis, it reeked of something else: arrogance. She stood at the back, her heart pounding like a drum in her chest, as Judge Harold Grayson's voice boomed with mockery. "What's this? A high schooler lost her way to detention," he sneered, his eyes locking onto her, the only black person in the room. Maya was 18, but her slight frame and unassuming posture made her look younger. She'd walked into the courtroom expecting scrutiny, but not these: a public jab from the man behind the bench. The room erupted in stifled chuckles, lawyers and clerks exchanging smirks as Grayson leaned back, arms crossed, savoring his own wit. Maya's cheeks burned, but she kept her gaze steady, her hands clasped tightly behind her back. She wasn't here to play games. She was here to upend them. Growing up in a small, mostly white town in Ohio, Maya had learned early how to navigate spaces where she was the odd one out. The whispers, the stares, the teachers who assumed she'd struggle, they were as familiar as the cracked sidewalks of her neighborhood. But Maya was no ordinary teenager. At 16, she'd graduated high school early. By 17, she'd earned a scholarship to a pre-law program at Howard University. And now, at 18, she was the youngest investigator ever hired by the state's Judicial Oversight Committee, tasked with probing allegations of misconduct against judges like Grayson. Her age and her race made her invisible to men like him until they realized their mistake. The assignment had come 3 weeks ago, a thick file landing on her desk with Grayson's name in bold. Complaints had piled up, biased rulings, dismissive treatment of minority defendants, and a pattern of leniency toward well-connected offenders. The committee needed someone to observe him in action, someone who could blend into the background. Maya, with her quiet demeanor and youthful face, was the perfect choice. But as she stood in the courtroom, Grayson's taunt still ringing in her ears, she wondered if she'd been sent into a lion's den. "Miss, if you're here to observe, at least try to look like you belong," Grayson continued, his voice dripping with condescension. He waved a hand dismissively, as if shooing a stray dog. "Or are you just here to take notes for your civics class?" The laughter grew louder, a clerk in the corner stifling a snort. Maya's jaw tightened, but she didn't flinch. She adjusted her blazer, the one she'd saved up for months to buy, and stepped forward, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. "I'm here on official business, Your Honor," she said, her voice clear and steady, cutting through the room's hum. The laughter died instantly. Grayson's smirk faltered, his bushy eyebrows knitting together as he leaned forward, squinting at her like she was a puzzle he couldn't solve. "Official business," he repeated, his tone now laced with irritation. "And what business could a kid like you possibly have in my courtroom?" Maya reached into her leather satchel, pulling out a slim folder with the state seal embossed on the cover. She held it up, letting the room see it before placing it on the counsel table. "I'm Maya Ellis, investigator with the Judicial Oversight Committee. I'm here to observe your proceedings, Your Honor, pursuant to allegations of judicial misconduct." The room went silent, the kind of silence that presses against your eardrums. Grayson's face reddened, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. The clerk who'd been snickering froze, her pen hovering over her notepad. A lawyer in a cheap suit coughed awkwardly, shifting in his seat. Maya stood her ground, her heart racing but her expression calm. She'd prepared for this moment, rehearsed it in her mind 100 times, but nothing could have prepared her for the raw humiliation of Grayson's initial attack or the satisfaction of watching his confidence crack. "Misconduct?" Grayson finally sputtered, his voice rising. "This is outrageous. You think you can waltz in here, some teenager, and accuse me of wrongdoing? I've been on this bench for 20 years. And that's exactly why I'm here," Maya replied, her voice unwavering. She opened the folder, revealing a stack of complaints, each one a story of injustice. 20 years is a long time to make mistakes, Your Honor. My job is to find out how many." The tension in the courtroom thickened, like a storm cloud ready to burst. Grayson's hands gripped the edge of his bench, his knuckles whitening. He wasn't used to being challenged, least of all by someone like Maya, young, black, and unafraid. The spectators whispered, their eyes darting between the judge and the girl who'd just turned his world upside down. Maya felt their stares, but she didn't waver. She'd spent her life being underestimated, and she'd learned to use it as a weapon. Over the next week, Maya attended every session in Grayson's courtroom, her presence a quiet but constant pressure. She sat in the back, taking meticulous notes, her pen scratching softly as she documented his every word, every ruling. Grayson's demeanor shifted noticeably when she was there. His usual bravado was tempered, his sarcastic quips less frequent, but the strain showed in his tightened jaw and the way his eyes flicked toward her whenever he spoke. He was rattled, and Maya knew it. The complaints against Grayson weren't just rumors. There was the case of Jamal Carter, a black teenager sentenced to 3 years for a minor theft while a white defendant with a similar charge walked free. There was Maria Alvarez, a Latina single mother whose plea for leniency was mocked before Grayson denied her bail. And then there was the wealthy businessman, caught embezzling millions, who received a slap on the wrist and a pat on the back. Each case was a thread in a tapestry of bias, and Maya was determined to unravel it. But Grayson wasn't going down without a fight. He began to push back, subtly at first, then with increasing aggression. During one hearing, he interrupted Maya as she asked a procedural question, snapping, "This isn't a classroom, Miss Ellis. Save your questions for your professor." The room tittered, but Maya didn't blink. She nodded politely and jotted down his words, knowing they'd make it into her report. Behind the scenes, Grayson's allies were circling. A local attorney, known for cozying up to judges, cornered Maya in the courthouse hallway one afternoon. "You're stirring up trouble, kid," he said, his voice low and threatening. "Grayson's got friends in high places. You sure you want to make an enemy of him?" Maya met his gaze, her voice calm but firm. "I'm not here to make friends or enemies. I'm here to do my job." The attorney scoffed and walked away, but his words lingered. Maya knew the risks. Grayson wasn't just a judge, he was a fixture in the town, a man with connections that stretched far beyond the courtroom. But she also knew the weight of the stories in her folder, the people who'd been dismissed, demeaned, or destroyed by his gavel. She couldn't back down, not now. The turning point came during a high-profile case involving a young black man named Marcus Reed, accused of assaulting a police officer. The evidence was shaky, conflicting witness statements, no clear video footage, but Grayson seemed eager to throw the book at him. Maya watched from her usual seat as Marcus, barely 20, sat hunched at the defense table, his eyes fixed on the floor. His public defender, overworked and underprepared, fumbled through the arguments, while Grayson leaned back, his expression smug. "Your Honor," the prosecutor began, "the defendant's actions show a clear disregard for authority. We recommend the maximum sentence." Maya's pen paused. She'd seen this before, Grayson's pattern of harsher rulings for black defendants. She glanced at Marcus, whose hands were trembling, and felt a surge of anger. This wasn't just about one case, it was about a system that let men like Grayson wield power unchecked. As the hearing progressed, Grayson's bias became impossible to ignore. He interrupted the defense attorney repeatedly, dismissing key evidence without explanation. When Marcus's mother, a soft-spoken woman named Clara, tried to speak on her son's behalf, Grayson cut her off. "This isn't a soap opera, ma'am. Save the tears for someone who cares." Maya's pen snapped in her hand, ink bleeding onto her fingers. She stood, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. All eyes turned to her, including Grayson's, whose face darkened with irritation. "Miss Ellis, you're out of order," he barked. "Sit down or I'll have you removed." "With all due respect, Your Honor," Maya said, her voice cutting through the room like a blade, "I believe it's you who's out of order." The courtroom gasped. Grayson's face turned a deep shade of red, his gavel slamming down with a crack that echoed like a gunshot. "How dare you," he roared. "You think you can lecture me? I run this courtroom. And I'm here to make sure you run it fairly," Maya shot back. She held up her folder, her hand steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her. I've documented every ruling, every comment, every time you've dismissed a defendant's rights because of who they are. This stops now. The room was a powder keg, ready to explode. Grayson's eyes blazed with fury, but for the first time, Maya saw something else in them: fear. He knew she wasn't bluffing. Her report, nearly complete, was a ticking time bomb, and he was standing on the fuse. The courtroom was a battlefield, and Maya Ellis had just fired the first shot. Judge Harold Grayson's gavel hung in the air, his face a mask of rage and disbelief. The spectators held their breath, the silence so thick it felt like the room itself was waiting for the next move. Maya stood tall, her folder of evidence a shield against Grayson's bluster. She could feel the weight of every eye in the room, but she didn't waver. This was her moment, the culmination of weeks of watching, waiting, and documenting the man who thought he was untouchable. You have no authority here. Grayson bellowed, his voice cracking with indignation. This is my courtroom, and I won't be lectured by some child playing dress-up. Maya's lips twitched, not with a smile but with the kind of resolve that comes from knowing you're right. I'm not a child, Your Honor, she said, her voice steady as steel. I'm an investigator with the Judicial Oversight Committee, and my authority comes from the state. You can check my credentials if you'd like, but I assure you, they're in order. Grayson's eyes darted to the folder in her hands, then back to her face. For a moment, he looked like a man staring down a cliff, realizing there was no way back. He slammed his gavel again, the sound sharp and desperate. This is a stunt. A publicity grab by some overzealous bureaucrats. I demand to see your supervisor. You'll meet them soon enough, Maya replied, her tone calm but laced with steel. My report is due tomorrow, and it includes everything I've seen here: your rulings, your comments, your bias. The committee will decide what happens next. The room erupted in murmurs, the spectators unable to contain their shock. Clara Reed, Marcus's mother, sat in the front row, her hands clasped tightly, tears streaming down her face. She looked at Maya with something like awe, as if seeing her for the first time. The public defender, who'd been floundering moments ago, stared at Maya with wide eyes, his mouth slightly open. Even the prosecutor, usually so composed, shifted uncomfortably, sensing the tide turning. Grayson wasn't done. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a venomous hiss. You think you can come in here and ruin me? I've served this town for decades. I know people, important people. You're nothing but a nobody with a grudge. Maya didn't flinch. She'd heard worse, from teachers who doubted her, from classmates who mocked her, from the world that told her she didn't belong in places like this. I don't have a grudge, Your Honor, she said. I have evidence. And it speaks louder than your connections. She opened the folder, pulling out a single sheet, a summary of her findings, condensed into bullet points that cut like knives. Jamal Carter, 18, sentenced to 3 years for stealing a phone. Michael Bradley, 19, white, same charge, probation. Maria Alvarez, denied bail for a nonviolent offense, while Robert Klein, a convicted embezzler, walked free with a fine. Shall I go on? The courtroom was a graveyard of silence now, every word landing like a hammer. Grayson's face drained of color, his hands trembling as he gripped the bench. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. For the first time, he looked small, diminished, a man stripped of his armor. Maya continued, her voice rising with quiet power. You've used this bench to pick and choose who gets justice, Your Honor. You've mocked people like Marcus Reed, people like me, because you thought no one was watching. But I was. And now the state is, too. The gavel slipped from Grayson's hand, clattering onto the bench. He stared at it, then at Maya, his eyes wide with something that looked like panic. The spectators were no longer whispering, they were leaning forward, hanging on her every word. Clara Reed stood, her hands shaking as she clapped, a single, defiant sound that echoed through the room. Others joined her, a slow ripple of applause that grew into a wave. Grayson's voice was barely a whisper now. "Get out," he said, but there was no force behind it. "Get out of my courtroom." "I'll leave when I'm done," Maya said. She closed her folder, tucking it under her arm. "And I'm not done yet." The next day, Maya submitted her report to the Judicial Oversight Committee. It was a 30-page document, meticulously detailed, with transcripts, witness statements, and a timeline of Grayson's rulings. She'd spent nights cross-referencing cases, interviewing defendants, and piecing together a pattern of prejudice that was impossible to ignore. The committee promised a swift review, but Maya knew the wheels of justice turned slowly, especially for someone like Grayson, who'd spent years building a network of allies. In the weeks that followed, the town buzzed with gossip. News of Maya's confrontation spread, first in whispers, then in headlines. Local papers ran stories with titles like "Teen Investigator Takes on Corrupt Judge" and "Justice on Trial in Ohio Courtroom." Some praised Maya's courage, others called her an upstart, a troublemaker out to ruin a respected man. Social media amplified the divide, with hashtags like "Justice for Marcus" and "Back Grayson" trending on X. Maya avoided the noise, focusing on her next assignment, but she couldn't escape the weight of what she'd started. Grayson, meanwhile, doubled down. He hired a high-priced lawyer, held press conferences, and painted himself as a victim of a woke witch hunt. He claimed Maya's report was fabricated, her credentials questionable. But the evidence was too strong, the voices of the wronged too loud. Jamal Carter's family filed a formal complaint, joined by Maria Alvarez and others who'd suffered under Grayson's gavel. The committee launched a full investigation, and Grayson was suspended pending the outcome. The final hearing came on a crisp autumn morning, the courtroom packed with reporters, activists, and community members. Maya sat in the front row, her hands folded in her lap, her heart steady but heavy. She'd been called as a witness, her report the cornerstone of the case against Grayson. The committee's lead investigator, a stern woman named Dr. Evelyn Carter, stood at the podium, reading from Maya's findings. "Judge Harold Grayson has demonstrated a clear pattern of bias in his rulings, disproportionately affecting minority defendants," Dr. Carter said, her voice carrying the weight of authority. "Thanks to the diligent work of investigator Maya Ellis, we have undeniable evidence of misconduct, including verbal abuse, discriminatory sentencing, and abuse of power." Grayson sat at the defense table, his face a mask of defiance, but his eyes betrayed him. They darted around the room, avoiding Maya's gaze. His lawyer argued that the complaints were exaggerated, that Grayson's record was exemplary, but the room wasn't buying it. Clara Reed testified about her son's case, her voice breaking as she described Grayson's cruelty. Jamal Carter spoke of the years stolen from him, his dreams of college derailed by a biased sentence. One by one, the victims of Grayson's gavel laid bare the cost of his arrogance. When it was Maya's turn to speak, she stood, her voice clear and unshaken. "I didn't come here to tear anyone down," she said. "I came here to lift up the truth. Justice isn't a privilege for the few, it's a right for everyone. And when someone like Judge Grayson forgets that, it's our job to remind him." The room erupted in applause, but Maya didn't smile. She felt no joy in Grayson's downfall, only a quiet resolve. The committee deliberated for 3 days before delivering their verdict. Grayson was removed from the bench, his law license revoked. Marcus Reed's case was reopened, and he was granted a new trial with a different judge. Jamal Carter's sentence was overturned, and Maria Alvarez received an apology from the court. As Maya walked out of the courthouse, the autumn leaves crunching under her feet, Clara Reed caught up with her. "You gave my son a chance," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You gave us all a chance. Thank you." Maya nodded, her throat tight. "I just did what was right," she said. Clara hugged her, and for a moment, the weight of the past months lifted. But Maya knew this was only one battle in a much larger war. The system was still broken, still tilted against people like her, like Marcus, like Jamal. But she also knew she'd made a crack in it, a small fracture that could grow with time. Back at her apartment, Maya sat at her desk, her laptop open to a new case file. The work never stopped, but neither did she. She thought of Grayson, now a disgraced footnote in the town's history, and of the people whose lives he'd tried to crush. Justice had been served, but it had come at a cost she was willing to pay again and again. The story of Maya and Grayson sparked debates across the town and beyond. Was justice truly blind, or did it depend on who held the gavel? Share your thoughts on right, wrong, and the fight for fairness in a system that often falters.